What up guys, you're back with Steph and Dennis, and today it's just gonna be me, but guess what? We're going over my salary progression, so how I went from $50,000 all the way to just under $80,000 in 3 years. So before we even jump in, it's important to know that everyone's path is gonna be different. Even in a carved out path like mine, where you start off as a consultant, eventually a senior consultant, and then a manager, even in that pathway, my progression is gonna look totally different from someone else's progression. I know firsthand that it's really helped me to have different conversations with my coworkers and different leaders to actually know what I should be asking for before going into those salary meetings. I mean, I know that now. Anyways, that's exactly why we're doing this video and sharing this knowledge with you guys. So if you're excited for this video, make sure you know what to do. Show us some love down below with a like, make sure you subscribe, and let's go. Okay, so my first job right after graduating university was at a bank. But let's run it back a little bit for anyone who's new here. So I went to the University of Ottawa and graduated with a Bachelor of Commerce, and I knew towards the end that I was gonna work within accounting and finance in some sort of capacity. So first job, thank God, was back in my city, Toronto. It was at TD Bank to be exact, and I was an associate in the chief accountant's office. So sounds a little bit more fancy than it actually is, but basically I was a financial analyst for them. Okay, so the way my compensation was structured was primarily based on the fact that I was on an 18-month contract. So basically they paid me an hourly rate that was the equivalent of about $50,000 a year. This meant that I had no benefits, I had no other compensation, no vacation, and no sick day, so I couldn't take any time off. And honestly, after a short period of time, I knew that I hated it there. Basically, the work wasn't interesting. A lot of the team was much older than me, so in their 50s and 60s, a lot of people nearing retirement. And on top of that, I was on this really long contract, which obviously is not ideal. So after 4 months, I knew that I wanted a better job, both from an interest perspective, but also one that would allow me to have a higher earnings potential in the future. Also, keep in mind, I was a fresh grad, right? And as someone who considers himself a high performer, I knew that I wanted to be in an environment that was actually driving and utilizing me. I pretty much knew that I wanted to work at a Big Four firm for that reason. So an advisory function pays a lot less than pure consulting, but one, this job paid more than my job at the bank, and two, I knew that I would have exit options in the future. So if I wanted to come back to industry or come back to the bank, I would be coming in at a higher position, and obviously I would demand more pay and more income for that reason. So for those of you that are keeping track of the timeline right now, basically graduated, and then 3 months in, I started looking for another job at a Big Four firm, and then by month 4, I was out of there. Okay, so before I move on, we've got a video where we went over the resume that actually got me the job at Deloitte, so we'll link it somewhere up top. But basically, I went from TD Bank to now a consultant in the assurance advisory practice at Deloitte. So I went from this role where I was on the internal side of this really big organization to now being on the client-facing side where I dealt with, let's say, like a TD Bank. And basically what my team did is we dealt with anything that fell under the CFO. So accounting and finance related, we were the consultants that came in and cleaned stuff up. So now when it comes to salary, here's where you can kind of screw yourself over, especially when it comes to timing. So basically, I just really wanted out of the bank, and salary wasn't my main focus. I knew that I wanted some sort of increase, but I knew that I really wanted to have benefits and vacation and all that, and I knew I really did not want a contract, especially a long-term one. So what they did is they offered me $50,000, so the same amount that I was making at TD Bank. Now, for me, I actually did end up negotiating, and there was an entire process, and it was unfortunate, but that's another video we'll link up top. But basically what ended up happening is I knew that based on market research, I also knew that I wanted a bump personally, that 55 was a good number for me to go in at. Anyways, long story short, they offer me 50, I counter with 55, and then they come back to me with 52.5, and I say, okay, cool, I accept it. So that happened in October, but fast forward to our company's year end or the next summer, that's when I got my first real performance review, and I got my first performance bump. So I went from 52.5 all the way up to $58,000 plus a $4,000 bonus. Now, what's funny is that at the time, I thought this was a really great bonus amount, right? And don't get me wrong, like this was a really good chunk of money to get all at once, especially after everything that had happened before. But that's the most amount of money that I've ever gotten in bonuses ever since. But we're gonna get into all that in a second. So at this point, for those of you guys that are keeping track, I'm just under a year into my consultant job and I'm sitting at $58,000. So after this, things started to move a little bit slower on the salary progression side and on the bonus front. After that last raise, which was in 2019, the next year brought us all the way up until the beginning of the pandemic, basically. To give a quick background, I'd been working hard all year. I really wanted to get promoted to senior consultant. That's what was next for me. I knew that I was gonna get it like hands down. Like I had been working. And I also knew that with that would come a really big salary bump and potentially a big bonus as well. Now, all of that sounds great, but those were my plans, right? Like none of us knew that there was a pandemic looming around the corner. So when it came time for my performance reviews, the conversations that I was having with the leaders, basically what they were telling me was that number one, promotions would be limited and they weren't gonna be paying out any bonuses whatsoever that year. So I basically didn't get my promotion on time. I essentially had to wait a couple months, but what I did get was a small bump in my salary from $58,000 to $60,000. Something that was also interesting in this conversation in particular was that I was having my salary conversation with a very senior partner that I had never met or even seen before. He basically hit me up on the phone, told me what my salary increase was gonna be, basically made it feel like there wasn't gonna be any conversation or any questions asked back and forth, and that was pretty much it, right? Like, just completely shut down everything. Now, obviously hindsight's 2020, but those are the moments where you're in those meetings, and even if you had a question or wanted to know how the decisions were made, it's just not a good feeling from an employee perspective, right? Like, even if I had a question, that question is not going to be answered because you just want to shut down everything. Like, to me, that just doesn't make sense. And, you know, on top of that, I was pretty down about not getting the promotion, which we talk about in another video that we'll link up top. But anyways, for those of you that are keeping track, we're going to move on to the next thing. All right, so after the summer, a ton of people started leaving the team, started leaving the practice, started leaving the firm in general. Like, a lot of people. The partners were getting worried, the managers are getting worried, I was getting worried. When all of a sudden, when a bunch of people start quitting, you know, you start to reevaluate things like, am I happy here? And, you know, the partners and the leadership start asking, are you guys happy? What can we do to make you happy? So something that kept coming up was the fact that all of us had been working so hard the prior year and we didn't receive any bonuses. And on top of that, there were no promotions. I think on my team, maybe there was like 2 promotions for my particular level, right? And there's a bunch of people, so it kind of didn't line up. Anyways, they brought back mid-year promotions, so something that they had done in the past but gotten rid of. But given the fact that there were so many talented people leaving just left and right, they basically decided that if you were already up for promotion the prior year, they would look at you again and see whether you were still eligible to get promoted. So fast forward, I ended up getting that half-year promotion and was now a senior consultant. Let's go. It wasn't as common, and obviously this was kind of like out of cycle, so I was super excited, but I also knew that it came with that pay bump that I was talking about earlier. I got the raise from $62,000 all the way up to $72,000, which was my biggest bump yet, so $12,000 basically in one go. But when it came to the actual conversation, pretty much the same vibe, right? Super senior partner that I didn't know, basically didn't want to have any sort of back and forth. This was your salary, this is what you're getting, this is your bonus, whatever. And it kind of sucked because I did anticipate on having to negotiate going into that conversation. Like, I was prepared, like me and Steph did some prepping beforehand. And basically what I wanted was above $70,000. Like, I knew based on talking to some friends within the firm, seeing what they were getting paid, I knew that I wanted to at least be above that. But ideally I wanted $75,000. But you know, once again, same vibe. I got shut down, they weren't having it, and they weren't hearing it essentially. So now I did also get a bonus of $500, which obviously isn't that much, especially compared to my first year. But, you know, it was the pandemic and they basically standardized bonuses based on level. So if you were a senior consultant, that's how much you got. Maybe if you were below, you didn't get any. I don't know. But they basically just standardized it based on your level. So now more recently, I've had another performance review. So I've gone from $72,000 to $78,000. So that's just a regular performance review, like no promotion, no nothing. And on top of that, a bonus of $3,000. Alright guys, so that's a wrap on this video. I hope you enjoyed hearing all about my salary progression over the last 3 years. If we're keeping a running total, we're at just under $80,000 in salary, and then a total of about $8,000 in bonuses over the last 3 years. Crazy. Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts, or even better, your salary stories down in the comment box below. I mean, this is how we're gonna change the narrative, so let's get it. Oh yeah, also for those of you that are still here at the end of the video, we've got some big news and some big videos coming up in the next couple of weeks, so make sure you stay tuned in. And yeah, better yet, actually leave me some guesses down in the comment box below on what you think the news is or what you think the videos are going to be. So yeah, let's go. As usual, make sure you do show us some love down below with a like. Make sure you are subscribed, and if you haven't seen any of our previous videos, make sure you do check them out next door, and we will be back. You know what's up. Let's go.